This is the last topic that I'm going to be covering today in the Submit a Topic little spot we're doing right now. So, the title of the video is called Atheism Kills More Than Anything Else. And I'm honestly very curious what the perspective here is going to be. My prediction, as somebody who's not seen the video and is going to be playing it for the first time, my prediction is that this is going to be some kind of appeal that Hitler was an atheist, Stalin was an atheist, and then we're going to go down that route. Apparently. That's my guess. Well, let's see.
There are many such countries that understand that a principal basis for the success of civilization and their country is God in the middle of it.
Okay, no. So, a principal basis for success for civilization is having the people united under something. Now, we've got a bunch of different ways to unite people. We have ways in which we unite people via enemies, and unite all the white Americans against the black. That's a thing we've done in the past. Unite all the evangelicals against the homosexuals and the gay. We've done that before as well. Unite us all against brown people in the Middle East. We did that after 9/11. An enemy can be just as much of a way to unite people as a god or a deity. And even when you consider the fact that God in the Bible is a uniting factor, even then, are you uniting with God or are you uniting against Satan? And that's a very interesting conversation to consider, at least for me, because there's as much issue with Christianity uniting under the beliefs of that God as it is also uniting under the things that God supposedly hates. But this is apparently going to be my first experience with the Brock Lurie Show. Let's see what else he's got to say.
Hi, I'm Brock Lurie, and welcome to the Brock Lurie Show.
Brock Lurie.
One of the things that I've already mentioned is that atheism has been the single greatest destructive force.
How? How does not... Okay, so, colloquial atheism, merely not believing in a god. Philosophical atheism, believing that a god does not exist. How are either of these concepts the single most destructive force in the world? How?
But what do I mean by that? Well, you've heard this mantra that somehow a religion has caused more deaths than anything else. Have you heard that phrase? I used to hear it all the time when I was an atheist, and I used to advance it. But as they say, yeah, that's true, except for the fact that it's exactly the opposite.
Who says that? Who? I mean, there's the whole meme. Well, yes, except actually no. That's not what he's talking about here, I don't think. Let's see. What's your perspective?
In fact, religion, if anything, was the one thing that saved the planet from dramatic murder and mayhem.
Oh? How? How did religion save us from murder and mayhem? Now, you can make the argument, I'm sure, that by proxy, by religion being a proxy that societies could unite under, and that things were developed for, like art and shit in the aristocracy, that this created a social order that people wanted, that people needed in order to create the society that we have today. That being forced to give money via tithing was used as a model for things like taxation. But by this argument, by shit like this, you'd have to also accept that without feudalism, the world would have fallen into mayhem and madness. Without monarchy, the world would have fallen into mayhem and madness. Your argument is not for religion necessarily if you go down this route. It's for literally any type of authoritarianism that can be used to control people. But,
atheism, by contrast, was the greatest single destroyer of all things.
Again, how has not believing in a god destroyed anything except maybe my rear end? How?
Atheism, through fascism and communism, both of which...
Fascism and communism. I think the word you're looking for is authoritarianism. Communism as a concept, when it is able to manifest, generally manifests in an incredibly authoritarian way. Yes, that is a problem. Yes, I understand that. That is an issue. fascism is not atheistic. Fascism comes in the form of evangelical Christianity just as much as anything else. In fact, having a mythological past for a country is so much easier to do through a Christian lens, especially for a place like America, than it is through an atheistic lens. Now, if you're going to say fascism as in Hitler's Germany or Mussolini's Italy, then we have a different conversation entirely. But while Mussolini was anti-church, he became pro-church eventually. So I don't think you can even make the argument where that's concerned. Moreover, you still haven't substantiated the argument then that it's atheism that's caused these things. You've had people that merely were atheists who caused issues. Because if you're going to go fascism and communism, then you're going to have to go and argue that these two things necessarily come from atheism, which, based on what he says right here,
were premised entirely on atheism and godlessness.
Apparently, they are premised entirely on atheism and godlessness. So, according to him, atheism leads to communism. It leads to fascism. Here's the thing, though. Definitionally, fascism is nationalism predicated on a mythological past. That has nothing to do with a god or a lack thereof. That can manifest just as easily, and in fact easier, under any variety of god concepts. How many times have we seen Christio-fascists walking around and calling for shit lately? Trying to argue that Christianity actually, in fact, was the determining factor that saved Western civilization, and Western civilization is aligned with the needs of the church, and without the church we wouldn't have Western civilization, and we have to save Western civilization. And then they end up going into fucking fascist rhetoric afterwards. But communism, the conceit of communism is that we should have a moneyless, classless, stateless society. Now, Stalin's state was not classless, and it certainly wasn't stateless. It was ruled by a communist party, though, so I guess by that definition you could call it communist if that's really what you want to do, but it's still not entirely accurate. There's no part of communism that is predicated on atheism. You could try to say that, oh, Marx said this, Marx said that. Marx isn't the inventor of communism, though. He's not. There's no point where you get communism equals atheism. Unless you were to accept, and even then this wouldn't really get you there, there is an argument, maybe, where early conservatism, early feudalism, was predicated that the kings got their power by the divine authority of the Lord. That is a thing that happened before. So you could argue then that capitalism equals Christianity because capitalism is feudalism too, and by that, necessarily communism would be the converse of it, which would require that. But that still doesn't work. This idea, this political framing, where Christianity is going to be on the side of capitalism and communism is going to be atheistic, it just doesn't seem to work for me. I don't see where that actually goes.
Killed tens of millions of people in World War II and another 50 million thereafter since the end of World War II.
Okay, so are you just counting people who died, just people who died? Because that's not a real accurate way of describing things. Because if we just want to count people who died, then by this metric, millions more have been killed by capitalism. You're necessarily going to have to argue against capitalism now. But capitalism is baked into the very fabric of American culture, the same way that Christianity is, so you would not make that point. The amount of people who've died because they've been denied medical care, died because they were imprisoned for shit that was entirely based on needs they were not able to meet because they were oppressed via capitalism, people who starved because of the capitalist system around them, the system that necessitates many people's murder based entirely on the needs of an oligarch class, all that shit. You have to ignore that to make this point. Because if you make this point, you have to accept that capitalism has its fair share of deaths too. Arguably more so. And even if we accept all of this shit, though, we accept communism kills and fascism kills. I'm willing to accept those things, obviously, but I have a problem with that. Aside from the issue that you haven't really well-defined communism, you're just basically saying Stalin killed people, which isn't the same thing as saying communism killed people. You are still making the point that these things are necessarily linked with atheism. But you haven't made that point. You've just accepted it and moved on.
All because of communism and fascism. Every single country that has employed godlessness as a central tenet of its governing principle has ended up with the gulags or the concentration camps. There has been no exception. There has been no good atheist country.
There's been no good atheist country? Really? No good atheist country. So no country... Let's see. If you're talking atheist country is in a state-mandated atheist country, then that's one thing. But even most atheists would not be comfortable in a state-mandated atheist country. The officially atheist countries, you've had North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, you've had China, you've had Cuba. Secular states, however, are also atheistic. In the sense that they are not Christian or not religious. By that definition, technically, we would be an atheistic state too, because we're secular. At least we're supposed to be. We're supposed to have a separation of church and state. You have things besides atheist and theocracy. Again, even most atheists would not say that they want an atheist country. They would want a secular country. State-mandated atheism just puts religious minorities, religious people in general, into oppressed groups. That's... This is a bad point. This is a really bad point. Dude.
By contrast, countries that have truly adopted the notion of God as a central figure, and I'm not necessarily talking about a theocracy, those...
But you are, though. Because the United States is still secular. You're going to bring up the United States, but we are a secular country. There is a middle ground here. There's state-mandated atheism, state-mandated religion, and then you can have a secular country, like what we are. A secular country is necessarily going to be atheistic in its governing principles, because it has to divorce the church from its principles. You still have people who operate within the country who are Christian, who are pagan, who are any number of things. But just as a microbiologist can be a Christian on Sunday and every day of the week, but as soon as he steps on the lab, he has to engage in methodological naturalism. Methodologically, we are a secular nation. If you're going to use this as some claim that, aha, we accepted the notion of God, congratulations. By that same token, we accepted the nature of atheism. We've accepted the glorious bounties of atheism into our country. You have to accept both. You can't just claim one and then be like, aha. You're basically, you have a meal, and you've seasoned it with salt and pepper, and you've claimed whole responsibility for the pepper for improving the taste of your meal, ignoring the salt that was used in the recipe as well. If you ignore the salt, and then you try doing this again with just the pepper, you end up with a theocracy. The chicken on your plate has become theocratic. And if you only use the salt, sure. Your previous examples of atheist states, which you didn't technically give, you just mentioned that they've had gulags and you've mentioned that they've had concentration camps. But even then, Germany was not an atheist state. This is just a bunch of bad points lopped together. Your Germany isn't even the salt. I can't even go further with that. The Germany isn't even the salt because it wasn't an atheistic state. You're ignoring everything required to make a secular meal. So you can have your gotcha against atheists.
Tended to thrive. America being the best example. Israel being another example. There are many such countries that understand that a principal basis for the success of civilization and their country is God in the middle of it.
Wait, hold on. A God or God? Because your God, Yahweh, who has a son named Jesus, is not the same flavor of God that Israel has. Their father God may be the same, but it doesn't have a trinity. It's not, Jesus isn't a part of it. This is not the same God. Is your point that a civilization merely needs a God belief? Or merely needs belief in your God? Which point is it? Because if it's that they need a God belief, period, and that's all, then you're basically just arguing that all countries require a big lie to be predicated on. And that big lie, by that notion, could be anything. For us, the big lie could be the founding fathers being some of the most inspired and wonderful and great men of the age, as opposed to them just being circumstantial nobles who happened to have things work out for them. The big lie can be anything. And if you've accepted Israel as one of your arguments, then necessarily your big lie would have to include people like the founding fathers as examples. You're basically arguing that any country needs a good mythologized past to function. Which is awkward considering you brought up fascism earlier.
But once you take out God from the equation, then anything goes.
Oh, that's not necessarily how that works.
Now, you don't have to believe me. The truth is, though, that history proves me right time and time again.
No, it doesn't. You've had to cherry pick to get to this point anyway.
Whether it's Pol Pot, Mao, Hitler, Stalin.
The nation was Catholic. For Hitler, the nation was Catholic. That doesn't work for you.
You name it. We go through it in my main chapter in Atheism Kills called Murder by Numbers.
Oh, so this is a book advertisement. This is a book advertisement. Okay.
That chapter shows you the multitudes of millions of people who were slaughtered in the name of atheism.
No. If you want to use Stalin as your example, the church, people in the church were not slaughtered in the name of atheism. They were slaughtered because an individual who viewed himself as the supreme authority saw a church, a place that had another authority that was necessarily over him, was a threat. That he necessarily would have viewed them as a threat. That has nothing to do with atheism. That has everything to do with authoritarianism. Your issue is authoritarianism. And I hate to tell you, but a Christian nation is going to be ultimately as authoritarian as anything you've named here. A nation that accepts theocracy. Because necessarily a Christian nation would have to be that, otherwise you're going to end up with a secular one. And I've pointed out, if you have a secular nation, you can't just say, aha, Christianity saved the West. It's secular. You've got a separation. You've got salt and pepper here. Not only are your examples bad, historically inaccurate, but these individual examples do not necessarily lead us to the conclusions, even if we accept what you said. This is awkwardly bad. This is a very awkwardly bad video, but I see that it's just an advertisement.
maybe not specifically as atheists,
That's a goalpost move.
but atheism was the central operating system of both fascism and communism.
Atheism still had nothing to do with those. Again, by this same logic, people like Hitler and Stalin both had mustaches. So the central operating figure had a mustache. Therefore, luckily for you, you don't have a mustache, so you're probably not going to engage in genocide. Unless you can conclusively link atheism as something that leads to these things. Not just engage in the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Oh, these people were atheists, and then they did horrible things, therefore atheism led to it. By this logic, I can basically judge anybody who's engaged in a terrible deed and was Christian and say that it was because of their Christianity they did the terrible deed. They engaged in whatever terrible shit I could formulate in here, that I could grab from history. This is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Nothing more, nothing less.
Nothing that religion has ever done can ever compete with what atheism has given us.
Well, we both agree with that. But not for the reasons that you think. Your point seems to be that atheism will never be able to kill as many people as religion. My point is that quantifying these deaths under either is silly. Because the deaths you want to quantify under atheism don't necessarily follow from atheism, and I'm sure you could poke holes in any deaths that I want to quantify under Christianity. The issue at hand is authoritarianism. And authoritarianism can come in any amount of flavors, both religious and secular. Authoritarianism can come in flavors of capitalism as well. Your enemy is not what you think it is. If you created a world where no atheist exists whatsoever, and all countries were necessarily theocratic or religious in some way, you would not suddenly have created a better society. You'd have just created functionally the societies that we had a few hundred years ago. We still had wars then. We still had famine then. We still had deaths then. We still had all this shit then. The issue is that when people gain supreme power, then we have a problem. That's your enemy, not atheism. You're doing the shit that could easily make people like me an ally to you, except you would rather make us enemies because it's so convenient for you to argue that the people that you've already concluded will be burning in hell are your enemies. But what do you think in the comment section below? Do you think my assessment of his position is fair? Let me know. I'd like to know. As always, everyone, please hit the link down below if you would like to support the channel. Please hit the like button if you haven't already, and please subscribe if you would like to see more of my content, and hit the bell notification icon so that you can see more. As always, everyone, though, insert end of video tagline.